All right, and this is our third lesson on solving quadratic equations. This time we're going to use square roots. As usual, what does it mean to solve that? We need to find all values of x that make that equation true. Okay, and I think we can all see that x has to be 4 or negative 4. Okay, normally we end up doing opposites to get x by itself. So in this case, we've got x squared. So what can we do to both sides? Square root both sides. So if we have x squared equals 16, we're going to square root both sides, okay? When we're doing these questions, every time we square root both sides, we need to remember that the square root of x squared doesn't equal x. It actually equals the absolute value of x, which we learned at the start of chapter 2. So let's have a look at question 5. So I'm going to square root both sides here. And up with the absolute value of x equals 10, which means that x has to equal 10 or negative 10 to make that true. Okay, and let's check that. 10 squared equals 100. Yep. And negative 10 squared equals 100. Also true. And number 7, notice this is similar to our radical equations. We want to get the squared thing by itself first, so I'm going to add 3 to both sides. I get x squared equals 36. Square root both sides, get the absolute value of x equals 6. So x is going to have to equal 6 or negative 6. Oops, that's not a 3. It should be a 6. So 6 squared minus 3 equals 33. Is true. And negative 6 squared minus 3 equals 33. Also true. So we've got two values of x that make our original equation true. They are both solutions to our equation. Okay, and number 11, just a little bit extra to do before we can square root both sides. So I'm going to subtract 19 from both sides. I get negative 2x squared equals negative 18. Divide both sides by negative 2. I get x squared equals 9. Square root both sides, the absolute value of x equals 3. So x is going to equal 3 or negative 3. Lazy way to write this is I can write x equals plus minus 3. That's just a lazier way to write the exact same thing. And let's check her. So negative 2 equals 3 squared. So that's going to be negative 18 plus 19 equals 1 is true. And same thing, negative 18 plus 19 equals 1. Perfect. So we've got two values of x that make our original equation true. They're both solutions. Okay, 13, we've got x squared equals negative 64. So I'm going to square root both sides. And up with the absolute value of x equals, can't square root a negative. Okay, so this guy, no value of x is going to make this true. We've got no solution. And my pen's decided to stop working. Okay, the other way we can think about this is there's no value of x that I could put in here where x squared is going to equal negative 64, because anytime I square it, that's going to be positive. So we have no solution. And as you can see, my pen's working again. Okay, question 3. We've already got the squared thing by itself, so let's just square root both sides. So I get the absolute value of x plus 3 equals 8. Which means that x plus 3 is either going to equal 8, or x plus 3 is going to equal negative 8. Subtract 3 from both sides, I get 5. Subtract 3 from both sides, I get negative 11. So x is either going to equal 5 or negative 11 to make that true. And let's just make sure that that's the case. Perfect. So when x equals 5 or when x equals negative 11, our original equation is true, so those are both solutions. Okay, 5 exactly the same as our last question. So I'm going to square root both sides. And I get x, oops, I should go up here first. X minus 1, the absolute value of, is going to equal 3. So x minus 1 is going to equal 3, or x minus 1 is going to equal negative 3 to make that true. Add 1 to both sides. X is going to equal 4, or add 1 to both sides. X is going to equal negative 2. Okay, and let's check those two. And both of these values of x make our original true, so they're both solutions. Alrighty, question 7. So I have to get the squared thing by itself first. So I'm going to add 20 to both sides. And I'm going to get x minus 2 squared equals 32. Square root both sides. I'm going to end up with the absolute value of x minus 2 equals root 32. So x minus 2 is going to equal, and remember root 32 is the same as 4 root 2, so x minus 2 is either going to equal 4 root 2 or x minus 2 is going to equal negative 4 root 2. Add 2 to both sides, so x is either going to equal 2 plus 4 root 2, add 2 to both sides, or x is going to equal 2 minus 4 root 2. Okay, let's check our solutions in the original. Two plus 4 root 2 minus 2 is just 4 root 2. And 4 root 2 squared is 32, so we get 32 minus 20 equals 12. We're good. And again, this is going to give us negative 4 root 2. Square it, we're going to get 32. And again, that's true. So these are the exact values of two values of x that make the original true. Notice this is pre-calculus 11, so we are not using decimals. And let's have a look at question 9. First thing we have to do is add 10 to both sides to get the squared thing by itself. Now we square root both sides. So x minus 2, absolute value of, is going to equal 10. And now here's a slightly lazier way we can write this. That means that x minus 2 is going to equal, it's going to equal root 10. X minus 2 is going to equal plus or minus root 10. And then we can just add 2 to both sides, and x is going to equal 2 plus or minus root 10. Notice this is the same as writing x equals 2 plus root 10 or 2 minus root 10. Okay, and let's do our checks. Root 10 squared minus 10. 10 minus 10 is 0. Good. And again, we end up with root 10, negative root 10 squared minus 10 equals 0, which is also 10 minus 10. So we're good. So we've got two values of x that make that equation true, and there's a lazy way to write it. And now one last example. We're going to subtract 36 from both sides. Notice the left side is squared and the right side is negative, so there's no way I can find an x so that the left side is going to be negative. It's impossible. So we end up with no solution. Alright, so really the most important thing today is make sure you get the squared thing by itself, then you square root both sides, and remember what we learned in chapter 2, which is the square root of x squared doesn't equal x, it equals the absolute value of x. And this will give us our 2 solutions as opposed to just one. Remember, solve means find all solutions. So if you miss one, you didn't find the whole solution.